the I think then we should begin with the questions. If you're fine with it, if you're comfortable, and if you're ready to go,
Yeah,
right?
let's do it.
Yeah, okay. Let's do it. Perfect. So, I'm here to understand a philosophical movement, and you are here to help me understand it better. So, let's begin with scratch. We have two words. One is German, and one is idealism. Both the words put together. Before going into that, I want to understand what is philosophical idealism. Am I making sense with the question?
Yep, you are.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Perfect.
Well, idealism, or at least analytic idealism, has become popular because of several, I'd say several like North American philosophers. But idealism goes very far back. It starts, um, I would say, maybe in the early modern era, so 16th, 17th century in Europe. And it starts off with Descartes, Rene Descartes, who was a French philosopher. And as a philosopher, as a young student, a young pupil, Descartes went to a school named La Flèche, and at the time, all of the universities were run by priests. That's why they called them the schoolmen, and that's why they learned the medieval scholastic tradition. But this scholastic tradition was extremely overwhelming with Aristotle and Plato, and of course, um, the church fathers and people like Aquinas and Augustine and this tradition, this Latin tradition. And Descartes was frustrated with this tradition because he felt that Aristotle and at least the Greeks, they didn't understand real mathematics. They didn't understand the world of the sciences. So, in a sense, idealism starts as this very modern, revolutionizing system of ideas that is, in a sense, antithetical or in opposition to medieval scholastic thought. Because Descartes' reasoning was philosophy should be able to grasp true certainty. Now, the difference between medieval scholasticism and or medieval philosophy was that each philosopher, like Augustine, Aquinas, Anselm, all of these names, they were all Christian, but they had different philosophies. They had different ideas about different doctrines. And the whole idea is that philosophy should give us absolute certainty, truth. If that's the case, why is one person disagreeing with another person when we should have some universal truth? Essentially, he kind of he wants to model his system of ideas after mathematics. Now I'm getting to the idealism part here. But for him, the reason why he does this is because mathematical objects are universal. Like you close your eyes, you can picture a circle in your head, a perfect circle, yet you can't draw the same perfect circle on paper. You can think of a triangle, a square, all of these objects. For him, these ideas, right? These ideas were, in a sense, um, they were placed in our head, according to him, in the meditations by God. So you can see already his way of arguing was that we have these clear and distinct ideas, like I'll give you an example, shape and extension. Now his argument for shape and extension was there is no such thing as an object without shape and extension. My pen that I'm holding up here, right? It has shape and it's extended. It's extended in space. It's got shape, but you can't have one without the other. And this association of clear and distinctiveness, right? The shape and extension could never be removed. But the only thing that can grasp that connection is the mind. And this is where idealism starts. Idealism is the fact that the mind grasps concepts right, grasps concepts in such a way that it illuminates us to our understanding by the light of reason. So that's a little bit cryptic, but let me just repeat that. Descartes would say something like, the light of reason illuminates the mind, right? We grasp certain ideas. Like, think about infinity and perfection. You have an idea in your head, even though you're in a different country away from me, of perfection and infinity. And the thing is, the only way that you can understand those ideas is by abstracting, by thinking, holy, how big is infinity? And you can do this. You can do this in your mind. You can abstract, pull back out, zoom out, as they say, and think about these ideas. Now, the only problem is that for this movement, which became rationalism, what they did was they put the mind, right? Even Descartes, he says how the mind is known better than the body. That's the second, I think that's the second meditation. And the problem with this idealism was what they put the entire world at odds, right? The empirical world, right, became almost an illusion. I don't want to say an illusion. I mean, for Descartes, the senses always are erroneous. They always give us faulty perception of the world. I'll give you an example. He was very smart with optics. So he knew that when light hits the retina of your eye, and the rods and cones absorb in all of the colors and shapes, the mind actually, the image in the back of your head is upside down and the mind turns it right side up. So he knew right away that the sensuous world, the world of sense experience, was already problematic. So idealism starts off with this idea that, well, let's call it rationalism, starts off with this idea that the world and all of ideas can be rationalized, can be understood as conceptual models. They're clearer to us in our ideas than they are in the sensuous world, in the world of experience, phenomenal experience. So that's what idealism, I would say, starts off with. Now, the idealism of Kant is much different, which we can get to. But I wanted to lay out that very long kind of sketch in history, because there was a reason why. There's something, even space and time for Descartes, right? You cannot be in a space without it being somehow connected to time, right? Even if you're on a bus, you get on this space, right? You get on at 8:30 and it moves. And then now it's 9 o'clock. So you're in this space connected with time. We don't understand that, but the mind does. The mind grasps this let's say, absolute connection, this kind of universal connection between ideas, clear and distinct ideas. So that was his way of thinking with what's called rationalism. But there are also other thinkers like Spinoza, Malebranche, Leibniz, who were also rationalists. And they disagreed with a lot of what Descartes said. Of course, everyone knows the famous saying, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, right? Where, everything, the main ground of reality is understood through the mind, through this cogito, through this act of thinking. So rationalism, which, by the way, according to both Hegel and Schelling, these are later names, call rationalism, or this form of idealism, as dogmatism. So if you read anything by Schelling, early Schelling, he calls materialism, so empiricism, but he calls rationalism dogmatism, because it essentially is a dogmatism. Like, yes, we do have some certain ideas in the head that we don't know where they came from, like the ideas of infinity and perfection. But at the same time, the rationalist argument was, well, who caused that idea in your head? And this is where the whole theological argument comes in. Well, if you're not the cause of that idea in your head of infinity, then it must have been caused by something, and it must be caused by some infinite, perfect, universal substance. And this is their argument for God. Well, Descartes' argument for God. But yes, so it starts off as rationalism that's deeply grounded in reason, right? This is the time of the Enlightenment. This is the time of the scientific revolutions going on. Descartes is, of course, a mathematician, a brilliant mathematician. So is Leibniz. Leibniz was a mathematician, a scientist, a librarian. Spinoza was grinding lenses and was aware of mathematics, was aware of so much things. So these are brilliant individuals, right? But at the same time, there was something, let's say, faulty about maybe their reasoning in a kind of ironic way. There you go.
Right. It makes sense to me. But then the question arises: how does this idea of idealism, which we see arising in Descartes, synthesizes with the idea of German idealism and how it changes in Kant? Because you mentioned that Kantian idealism, if there's a thing like that, is very different from what Descartes expounded. Am I correct?
You're correct, 100%. It's interesting. The movement after rationalism is, well, materialism, empiricism. And this is a doctrine of philosophers that are reacting to the rationalists. So people like David Hume, John Locke, of course, Thomas Reid, and Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley. So the university in California, what's pronounced Berkeley, is named after Berkeley because he came over there and started a colony there, etc. But Berkeley's idealism was the most radical. He believed that reality is grounded in perception. So first perception. So I always, when I teach this to my students, they kind of go, what? Think of this room that I'm in right now. I mean, I've got tons of pictures and cutouts of Schelling there because you all know that I'm a Schelling kind of crazy maniac when it comes to Schelling. But the minute I leave this room, I'm no longer perceiving the room. What happens to the room? The room fades. Well, what does it fade into? Well, for Berkeley, God maintains its consistency, holds on to its subsistency, let me say. And there's also Locke, who was both oddly at sometimes idealist and also realist, or let's say empiricist. But really, the kind of coffin in the nail in the coffin has to come with David Hume, who, for me, I mean, I've taught David Hume now for 10 years, but Hume himself was such a pivotal character in continental philosophy. So big, and yet was the nicest person ever. He was hated upon Europe, on the continent of Europe. So much so that, people would come up to him and swear at him because, well, look what he's doing. He's demolishing all of these ideas. And he'd be like, hey, do you want to play some pool? And he was like a really nice guy. And actually, it's really funny. One of my mentors, his name is Stanley Twyman. He is a Humean scholar. He told me the first time he was lecturing, I couldn't stop laughing because he said this story. David Hume couldn't get published. So you know how he published his works? In cigar shops where you'd go get your beard shaved. So you could sit there, have your hair cut. I don't have any hair, but you could have a haircut, your beard trimmed, and then there you go. There's some work by David Hume there, so you could just read some Hume. But essentially what Hume does is Hume is absolutely skeptical of both miracles and of both the rationalist tradition. For him, he even situates himself in the fact that even causation, something as simple as causation, we're not so sure about it. I'll give you a great example. Will the sun rise tomorrow? I always say this. This is a Humean argument. Well, do you know that the sun's going to rise tomorrow? Most people will appeal to science and say, yes, it's going to rise tomorrow. the point is that that's not knowledge. This is David Hume's point. That is what he calls anticipation. We anticipate an event that's going to occur before it happens. And that is not truth. That's not actuality. That's not certainty for Hume. This is Hume's whole point. A lot of our understanding of things are because of constant conjunction. So witnessing events over and over and over again in time, but also cutting and pasting ideas. Like, I'll give you a great example. In the Christian faith, everyone says when you die, you go to the pearly gates. Well, what is Hume would say, what's a pearly gate? It's pearls and a gate, and we compound those ideas together. We bring those ideas together, and that becomes an idea? He says no. Or even terms like gold mountain. We bring two things together, we compound them, and then there you go. That's how we have these ideas. So he is basically stating, we have an entire problem in the sciences, starting off with even ourselves. For David Hume, he doesn't believe in the idea of the self. He thinks the self is, I would say, the best modern example is a movie theater. Go into a movie theater, sit in the chair, watch a film with your friend, and that's what Hume thinks the mind is. It's just a series of images on a screen that somehow the sequences of those images give us some kind of round image of the world. And by the way, Hume is also, this idea of images in the mind is going to inspire someone like Bergson much later on. But so there you go. Now we have a crisis in philosophy. The idea that there might be a problem with causation and that there is no image of the self. There's no real idea of selfhood, because what's the self? If I asked you and your viewers, what's the self? This is a big issue in Europe and in North America. In other Eastern traditions where they have no idea of the self, right? Especially in Japanese philosophy, there is no I, right? They're used to this. They're used to talking about being. They're used to having these ideas. But in Europe, it's a huge issue. And this is a crisis in European science. And that's what starts the Kantian tradition. Hume is brought to Kant by Hamann in Königsberg, and it it kind of gives Kant almost heart palpitations. He's reading this going, what? There's no self? What? There's problems with causation? What's going on here? And so he has to kind of recreate an entire system of philosophy. Now, at the time, Kant is just doing metaphysics. He's teaching people like Baumgarten, and 1750s and 1760s, Kant is quite weird. He's doing anthropology work, he's doing other work, but then finally, when Hume comes to him and he starts reading this issue of a crisis, he kind of puts himself away for a couple of years and starts writing the Critique of Pure Reason. And he realizes that something has to be done with both idealism, realism, let's call it empiricism. Something has to be done. I'm really sorry for all of the long-winded answers here, but I have to set up
Not at all. It is actually helping me, yes, the exact idea. It is actually helping me build up where is it all coming from. And it's very important to understand the historicity of many events leading to this one event that we are here to discuss. Right?
Right, yeah.
Please go on. Yeah.
So that is the central issue that Kant is facing. Now, it's really funny. A lot of people don't know this because there's so many. When Kant died, all of the biographers that were his friends, so people that were going to write biographies on Kant, they didn't like Kant. So he had his enemies writing biographies about him. And so there's so many false narratives about Kant. The whole idea that you could set your clock to 5 o'clock and Kant would walk around, that's not true. That didn't even happen. He did like to go for walks, but that's not true. So I highly recommend the viewers If they want, there's good books on Kant's life. He was interesting. He was a very interesting character. I'll give you a really funny story about this. At a dinner party, Kant was worried that a broken glass, because back then when a glass broke, they would just dig a hole and bury the glass somewhere in the ground. But Kant was worried. What would happen in 100 years when that glass came up? Someone would step on it and hurt themselves. So he did the mathematics and all of the work in his head to figure out how many feet he could dig down to bury this broken glass, which is that's a true story, which is really funny. So Kant gets this book from Hamann of Hume and kind of wakes him in his so-called dogmatic slumber, he states. And what happens is that he realizes that something has to be done with our understanding of causation, and something has to be done with our understanding of the self. And so now, the term German idealism is coined in the 1850s by believe it or not, by a Marxist scholar. It's trying to understand this movement from Kant to Marx. And at the time, they called it transcendental philosophy, because Kant calls his work transcendental idealism. So when we say German idealism, what we mean is really Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel. Kant's not really considered a part of the German idealist movement. Now, what I'm saying is it's controversial because a lot of scholars, like if you read Friedrich Beiser's work on German idealism, Kant is excluded. Only bits and pieces about his critique of judgment are brought up. But Fichte really is the father of German idealism. And we can call Kant the great grandfather of German idealism. In Europe, if you go to universities like Louvain on the ENS and Padua in Italy or Freiburg, this whole century, these ideas of thinkers are called classical German philosophy. And now we call it post-Kantian philosophy. So there's many names for German idealism. So Kant is this leading figure that is dealing with this big problem in the sciences, in philosophy. And it's funny, when the Critique of Pure Reason came out, nobody read it. Not a single person read it. People thought it was obscure, it was too dense, it was long. If you open up the critique to this day, you can read 3 pages without one period. So you're going, what's going on here? I mean, Kant is an enormously dense writer, and it's extremely sometimes hard to get in. But once you get into reading Kant, you become a Kantian because his arguments are so rich and they're so strong and they're so really interesting to work through. But Kant actually wasn't very popular at all. It took an Austrian named Karl Leonhard Reinhold to come along and realize the kind of absolute revolutionary work in Kant's work. And so Reinhold wrote these kind of meditations, in a sense, these letters or these newspaper articles on the Critique of Pure Reason, popularizing ideas like, is there a beginning of time? Is there a best of all possible worlds? All of these issues, many issues that are involved in the critique. And this heightened popularity in Kant. Kant became like a pop star, like a rock star overnight because of these writings by Reinhold. And to this day, I think one of the best introductions to reading Kant, if you're really, really you're a little nervous about jumping into Kant, is reading Reinhold's letters on the Kantian philosophy. And that's what he did. He wrote these series of letters on several issues in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, and they got published in a newspaper, and they became extremely popular and all around everywhere. People were being engrossed in Kantian philosophy. So Kant is huge. Now, I wanted to bring up that that segment here. Now we can talk about, if you like, what makes Kant's philosophy so revolutionary. But I wanted to bring up that point that Kant wasn't just accepted overnight like that. It took people reading his work and trying to come across his ideas and to challenge these ideas, and also for his work to kind of just shine through. And to this day, he's one of the greatest philosophers of all time.
You mentioned that Kant highly became interested in the question of self, right? And I also see this later with Hegel, that while writing the master slave dialectics, he was as well very much interested in the question of self, right? And we'll
Right.
talk about it later, but I have a question before that, and the question is very along the same lines, that what were the questions German idealists, in which I also include Kant, I'm not excluding him, were asking, right? Because, and were they asking unprecedented questions? And if the questions were not unprecedented, were they answering it differently than the people who were trying to answer it before them? How was that like? Because you mentioned about Hume and his idea of self, and then Kant wanted to figure out what exactly the self means, right? Because it cannot mean anything, and there is no possible idea that there is no self. So, what answer did Kant come up with, and then what answer did Schelling or Fichte or then Hegel come up with, right? So, if we can talk about that a bit, yes.
So the three Kantian questions are: what can I know? What ought I to do? And what may I hope? So what can I know is epistemology. It's grounded in what can we know as individuals. What ought I to do is an ethical question, and what may I hope is, what can philosophy do for the human species? These are the great three Kantian questions that are used in the beginning of the Critique of Pure Reason. But Kant realizes that it's not just going to be a metaphysical or epistemology. It's got to be a complete, we have to tear down the entire building and start again from the beginning. And so for Kant, he really begins by changing a lot about the world. So first and foremost, he says that the human being has two forms of sense. We have space, which is our exterior space, so the space around us, the space that fills objects, and interior, in an internal sense, which is time. So time is inward for us. And he does this for a reason. For him, because we can't get at the things themselves, the pure pen in itself, I can't grasp every element inside the pen, he realizes that something in the mind, something in our understanding, right, allows for the world to conform to our understanding. And this is what he says, that this is the conditions of all possible experience, right? There's a limitation to what we can know for Kant. We can't know the whole. We can maybe understand the parts that make up that whole, right? And this is what Fichte and Schelling and Hegel will change later with absolute idealism, right? With grasping all of reality. But Kant is very, he is almost suspicious. He doesn't want to say we can grasp all of reality. But what we can do is this. We can understand that when you open your eyes, colors flood in, shapes come in. We have ideas of certain things. And so for Kant, the world that we live in, we only know it through our own experience. We don't know it through anything else. So that world is broken down by faculties in our understanding. So faculties like quantity, right? The quantity of objects behind you. I see you got it looks like a drawer or it looks like a desk behind you, right? There's a curtain there, right? Quantity is the numerous objects that fill in space. Quality is intensities, colors, sounds, The next one is relation, how these objects are related to you, the being, human being. And finally, modality, how we think about them. Now, modality has to do with the kind of transcendental element. Well, what does that mean, transcendental? It means that this world that we know and experience, which is part of these conditions of all possible experience, conform to these faculties. These faculties then break them down and synthesize them for our own experience, for our understanding of the world. Now, for all of those people that are watching that are hardcore Kantians, yes, I'm maybe talking about Kant in simplistic terms, but I'm trying to get his basic ideas down so everyone can follow along with us. So all of these categories are important, but it's not just that. It's the fact that we must have concepts that have cognitive content as well. So our intuitions about the world, these intuitions can't be empty. We have to have intuitions about specific concepts, and those concepts have to have content. And without them, without concepts at all, we wouldn't have an understanding of the world. Now, what does that mean? It means that there is a series of logical and cognitive concepts that give us information about the world, because the world itself conforms to this understanding of who Chris is or who you are. And this is the great revolution that Kant does. Now, he's not an idealist. He's oddly an empirical realist, maybe. But at the same time, what he's saying is he joins empiricism and idealism together to form this transcendental idealism. Because it's not like he's saying the world doesn't exist. He's saying that the world does. It does come forward to us. It conforms to how we see and experience the world. And the funny thing about that is that already the human mind, it synthesizes all of these experiences of quantity, quality, relation, and modality. It brings them all together for a nice kind of systematic unification of how we understand the world. And that's the brilliance of Kant. The brilliance of Kant is of him, bringing these complex issues towards us. Now, space and time for him, he doesn't believe in like a universal quantity of space. He thinks space is understood within the individual that is seeing these phenomenal appearances or these phenomenal objects in space. And that's another problem, that Kant calls all of these objects in space appearances. That's the big fundamental problem. This is what starts a lot of issues in German idealism, especially with Fichte and Schelling, Hegel, of course. But Hegel would agree also in certain points with Kant. Like for Hegel, if you open up the phenomenology of spirit, the first thing he says is that consciousness must always have an object. Meaning we're already involved in this always already position of being in the world and being conscious of objects before us. That's me jumping ahead there for a second, but there are, yep.
I just want to add a point to understand this better, right? And that is Kant by any chance, from what you have said, right? Is Kant by any chance saying or stressing that it is only our presuppositions of certain categories and concepts that will come in the way when we are dealing with the world?
Yes.
Is that a fair assessment of the thing that you have mentioned?
Yes, absolutely. And that's another
Okay.
thing. And one of the biggest problems here is this. Kant is, in a sense, limiting transcendental idealism because he doesn't want what Descartes did. He doesn't want reason to leap outside of itself. He has this great line at the end of the critique where if we unchain reason, we'll be staring ourselves at the abyss. We'll be at the feet of the abyss if we do this. And so we can't just unchain reason and say we can grasp all of the world, the cosmos, by our light of reason. Our mind can jump out and grasp the event horizon of a black hole. No, he would never agree with that. He would say things like, I know that you're a human being. I know that you're a human being because I have to impart that onto you, but I don't know you, I don't know you as, I can only know certain things about you. I don't know you inside and out. So the human being, God, freedom, and the soul become these transcendental illusions that he says we need to make room for. We need to understand these ideas. So for Kant, he moves away from theoretical concepts of freedom to something called practical freedom. This is where the philosophical deontology comes from. For Kant, you never know, you can never experience freedom. You understand a theoretical concept of it, but the only way of understanding real freedom is through duty, through praxis. I recognize you as an individual, as a free and living being. In my dutiful action, I recognize you as an individual, that you have autonomy, right? Autonomy. You have your own sovereignty, your own self-determination. And by recognizing that, I see you as an end in yourself, just like you see me as another being. The minute that we sever that tie and treat each other as means to ends, we destroy that relation. But you see, I can't just leap inside your head and grasp everything about you. That's what Kant is essentially saying. There are certain things, like nature becomes also problematic for him, that maybe inspires the romantics. Same thing with nature. We can't just roll our hands into the soil and go, oh, yep, trees think too. We can't do that, although I do believe that trees have some form of consciousness. Right? So there are limitations to our reason and limitations to our knowledge. And Kant does that as a kind of barrier, as a safety mechanism, so reason's not leaping outside of itself and grasping things, which I think is a brilliant thing. But at the same time, he needs to extend his critique, and he does. So he thinks that the concept of God is something that reason can't grasp, but we still have an idea of it. We have some sort of cognitive content of the concept of God. Same thing with freedom. Same thing with the immortal soul. These three big Kantian questions, these three big Kantian ideas. He says they're illusory because they're not part of the conditions of all possible experience, but we have some sort of cognitive content. He calls them noumenal objects, just like the human being is a noumenal entity as well. I can't know you in and of yourself, but what I can do is I can extend rational autonomy to you and self-determination. I recognize you through praxis as an individual. This is his practical philosophy. Anyway, sorry, I went on a tangent there.
Completely fine. I just want to know, while you're talking about this limitation Kant mention, does he also say anything about where this limitation comes from? Or maybe why is the limitation there at all?
Yeah, I mean, you can say that the tradition comes from like Leibniz, who thinks that there's a sufficient reason for everything, right? There's a sufficient ground for why things are the way it is. But Kant, agreeing with this, that there's a sufficient reason, also wants to state that because we are attuned, right, to the world, or the world is attuned to us, and it kind of conforms to how we experience it and how we experience the world through these categories and faculties and concepts. He doesn't want to go beyond that. There's no, when people see the word transcendental idealism, they think, what, we have this transcendent knowledge, we can grasp everything. And no, this is where Kant's limitation comes in. There isn't this kind of infinite, vast amount of knowledge that we can grasp. There is, in a sense, we chain reason. I like thinking of it this way. We chain our reason. We ground our reason to this one line that he uses throughout the Critique of Pure Reason, that this is the conditions of all possible experience. Anything else, if we were trying to understand the unconditioned, we would be in a problem, right? We at one point he says like this is the unconditioned conditions of conditions. Like he literally states that in in the transcendental deduction. He used that exact phrase to talk about the issue here of unchaining reason and of how much knowledge that we can have that's conditioned based on these categories. So the revolutionary thing about Kant is that when I say limit, I mean it's like we can't get outside of this. We can't leap outside of our own head. Like I can get to know you. We can become friends. We can go biking. We can go, I can come and visit you. We can chat. We can chill. We can hang out. We can do all these things. And we know each other. But I can never know you truly, infinitely, in and out and everything. That's his point. There has to be this element of praxis that I extend to you as a rational, autonomous being, self-determining being. And he does this on purpose. Like he does this, not on purpose. He does this so because there is, in a sense, there is this problem of, the mind in a vat, right? Like the soul in the machine issue, right? That everyone, that are very popular issues in contemporary life. Like, how are we an ensouled being? Like how does material and immaterial substances, how do they connect, right? This is the big problems that the rationalist faced. And Kant is saying, well, the self that we understand, he calls the transcendental I, which he calls apperception as well too. Transcendental I or apperception or the transcendental cogito. There are three names for it. And what this model of apperception does is it synthesizes all of our experiences. It brings those categories that we were talking about, quantity and quality and relation and modality and space and time and all of these things. It unifies them into one experience. And this is his way of answering David Hume's problem of having no self, or right. And then causation, the problem of causation is answered because cause and effect relations occur internally to us. They occur through our experience of time, how we experience the schematization of time. I'll give you an example. That's a huge mouthful there. You get on a bus and you're going to work, right? You get on this bus. It's 8:30. It's 11:56. Let's say you get on. You sit down, and as you get on, you're moving. And you go past a couple cities, towns, villages, you get off and go to work. Now you're at time B. What connects that prior time and that new time together? What bridges that gap? And this is what Kant is saying. This cause and effect relationship is internally grasped by us, right? It's grasped by our interior sense of time. That's still, because there's this problem that Locke brings up that, what keeps us connected is memory. But the minute we lose memory, we're no longer ourselves. Kant is saying, no, there's this internal clock in us that helps connect, synthesize all of this. So the role of apperception, the role of the transcendental I is this huge, vast mechanism, or not mechanism, but is this tool that helps us, synthesizes a lot of things. But there's still multiple problems with Kant, right? Kant thinks that at the end of the Critique of Pure Reason, there's these antinomies where, did the world begin in time or did it begin not in time? Is there no such thing as time, in the cosmos? These great antinomies that he has, theses and antithesis, and they're never really resolved. And he does this because this is the limitation here speaking. This is the limitation of reason in a sense. Sorry, that was a huge, I went all over the place there.
No, I'm actually enjoying it. Right. So I have a very similar question to ask, but in different time periods. But before that, I have to really understand this, right? And for anybody who's watching it. So there are four known phases of German idealism as far as we know. I mean, there are a few more, but on the outset, we are only aware of these four people, right? If we include Kant as well. One is Kant, then we have Fichte, then we have Schelling, and then we have Hegel, right? And then we also talk about the poster boys of German idealism. The middle two are left; they are excluded, and we only talk about Kant and Hegel, right? So, if you could briefly take me right now through this transition that is happening, right? And then I would come to the more interesting part of knowing how this transcendental idealism changes into subjective idealism in Schelling, if I'm correct, and then absolute idealism into Hegel, right? So before coming to that part, I really want to understand the transition that is happening within these four philosophers, or from time to time to these four philosophers. I hope my question makes sense to you.
Oh, it did. It did. It did.
Right.
So the German tradition were quite well read with the French and the English tradition. But in order to understand, you know, what led to German idealism, there's also people like Baumgarten. There's someone named Christian Wolff who was a Leibnizian, that he modernized rationalism, reason as well too, and some of these thinkers as well. But you're right. After Kant, what happened was Fichte Fichte wrote a letter to Kant saying, "You're brilliant, and I have a thesis that I'd like you to read, and I would like you to tell me what you think of this." Kant loved this thesis, and Fichte went to go see him in Königsberg. And as soon as Fichte got there, he asked Kant for a loan so he could publish. And Kant, being very frugal, said, "I'm not going to give you any money, but I'll introduce you to my publisher." So Fichte published his 1792 treatise. No, yeah, 1792 treatise, and it got published, and everyone thought it was the fourth critique. It was very Kantian. And Fichte became instantly famous. Fichte started teaching in Jena, and he was well known, and he went back to Germany, and he planned on publishing his system of knowledge, which he calls the doctrine of science, the Wissenschaftslehre. So Lehre means learning, the learning of the science, or the knowledge, or the science of knowledge, let's say. But Fichte is quite different than Kant. Now, here's the thing. Here's the unfair thing about Fichte and Schelling. Because unlike Hegel, who has one system and an encyclopedia and a philosophy of right and a philosophy of history that are all connected, Fichte's philosophy and Schelling's philosophy change over time. They mature. So when I talk about Fichte, and this Fichte of subjective idealism, which, by the way, Hegel coined the term subjective idealism on Fichte. Fichte did not like that terminology. He was offended at that terminology, actually. I'm talking about the 1794 to 1795 Fichte, which is his first release of his Wissenschaftslehre. So he publishes vast amounts of the science of knowledge. If you look up, okay, I'll stop using the German, but every time you look up Fichte's Science of Knowledge, he has multiple editions. He has a 1794 one, a 1797 called The New Method. He has a 1799 one, an 1801 Science of Knowledge, an 1804, 1807, and onward, because he's always bringing all of these things together. When Reinhold, so this name that we were familiar with before when we were talking, Reinhold takes the chair of Jena, right? He's the one that popularized Kant. He popularized Kant so much that every chair of philosophy in Germany was a Kantian. That's how big Kant was at this time. Every university chair had a Kantian chair, had someone that was familiar with Kant and Kant's philosophy. That's how big he was. Kant got into trouble as well, too, by the Prussian king. He was silenced, actually, because a lot of people became skeptical of Kant's understanding of God. He thought maybe Kant was an agnostic, or that's another story we'll get to maybe later. But essentially, Fichte's science of knowledge, which really is the birth of German idealism that we know, is a very complex, it's very difficult. It's maybe more difficult than Kant. So if this seems hard and maybe abstract to grasp, you're probably right on the same line as a lot of people. Fichte wants to incorporate what he calls freedom into every movement of the human being. And the German term is Tathandlung, which means the active deed. Even thinking for Fichte is a free act. He is he's inspired by Kant, but at the same time the free act, this act of freedom, this act of thinking, is extremely important for him. And he wants to think about how we understand the world. And for Fichte, it gets really, really complex. He thinks there's something called a universal I. So let's just say that this hand is a universal I. And then there's the empirical I. Let's say it's like this. So the empirical I that's in the world, right, faces obstacles, right? But the empirical I is always, it's like this. It's like how do I explain this? It's like hopefully you'll edit that part out, because this is me like stumbling here.
Don't worry about any of it. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
It's like philosophizing philosophy. So the universal I is constantly, I know, right? The universal I is constantly positing things. Just think about this for a second. A second ago, you were thinking about editing this video, and now you're thinking about what Fichte is saying, right? Where did that change and shift happen? So this universal I is constantly positing thoughts, ideas. Now that's one thing. That's not the I. That's not you. That's just the central positing universal I. So when it does this, it brings in everything. It brings in your thoughts. It brings in everything together. But there's also this empirical I that's also experiencing. So it brings in your thoughts, and then it connects the empirical I. And I'm doing this waxing and wax off thing here going on here. I'm doing this thing. I don't know why. So it's what is essentially happening is that he uses this example of A equals A, which is the law of identity. So this empirical, this universal I that's constantly positing experience, right, brings in experience at every moment. It's a kind of free thinking. It's this free act of synthesizing all of our ideas. But at the same time, we have to think about things that we can't posit, right? I can't posit my phone. My phone is completely separate to me. And I can't bring you into my consciousness. I can bring an idea of you into my consciousness. So there's also this resistance, this Anstoß, this other that's not you, but's helping you understand also the world. And it becomes what's called the not I, which is extremely confusing. So there's this I, empirical I, and not I. There's these three things that are now being posited and being synthesized in the mind. When Schelling and Hegel read Fichte, they are absolutely blown away, because here is someone taking Kant's work, but making it more free, and also at the same time making it interesting and doing these great lectures. Fichte was a wonderful lecturer. There's There's a story about him that when he was a young kid, he could memorize sermons in the church so well, memorize them by heart. If you missed the sermon in church, you could go to Fichte's house and he would recite the sermon for you. So Fichte was a fantastic lecturer, and he inspired so many people. People like Novalis and the Schlegel brothers went to Fichte's lectures. I think Schelling went once. But anyways, there's this tripartite systematic approach to understanding how we cognize the world. The problem here now is that for Fichte, this is me reducing Fichte to subjective idealism on purpose so we can get to others. The problem of solipsism is an issue here. The fact that it's only this universal I that's freely positing and bringing in our cognitive experience along with this not I, which are objects in the world. But the central issue is, okay, well, where does the world come in? Where does nature come in? What are all what's going on here? Fichte is more concerned with bridging the gap between content and form, and intuitions and concepts, and practical and theoretical philosophies. So I've been describing the theoretical element of philosophy, right? This positing of the I. What does positing mean for those viewers? Positing is grasping a thought. It's grasping something and bringing it into your experience. So you pause this video and you go and have a coffee, right? So you're in this experience of having a coffee, like me, I'm having a coffee. And then you come back to the video and you jump back into the video, and you can somehow jump right back to the video where you are. You're back where you are. You're understanding Fichte. What does that? This is what Fichte is talking about these positing of experience into our understanding. So the central problem is this a solipsistic world? Do we understand what are other human beings? Right? So in the 1790s, Fichte is extremely popular, very popular. He's popular to all the romantics, so people like Novalis and the Schlegels. And Fichte considers his philosophy the transcendental philosophy, the philosophy. It's the science. Kant gets very upset by this, by the way. Kant ends letters with Fichte because he's annoyed with Fichte, taking the Kantian critiques and his system onward. And now it's changed, right? This is German idealism proper now. And it seems to be a metaphysical system. Kant was against metaphysics. Kant was against being a rationalist, being an idealist. He wanted to have this is why we have this conditions of all possible experience, but the world kind of conforming to our understanding, having limitations. And now the Fichtean I is positing again rapidly, right? It's this universal I, right? The I can now reach the absolute or the unconditioned. And this is something that Kant would not allow. That, right? There's always that limitation of knowledge, right? Reason can't be unchained, as he states. So super problematic. Now, I like to think of it in this way. Think of moments with yourself. Now, I'm going to describe this positing process. You yourself, right? You finish recording this video with me. You're thinking about editing it, but at the same time, oh no, I have to go to work now, or tomorrow I work. I have to get this finished for school. I have to do all these things. So there's like 4 sets of you talking to yourself in your head. So what synthesizes all of that? What brings all of that together? And this is what Fichte is talking about, this active process of positing, this active free positing, or this active free thinking, or this, right? But Schelling also becomes skeptical of what this not I is. Right? In 1794, the not I is the other, but it's also nature, it's also objects. And these objects have to, in a sense, check. They have to they have to give us some kind of obstacle, right? Because what the not I does, this is sounding too abstract now, I'm sorry, is that it keeps this project of positing in check. Right? Think about like you're walking down the street and then you bump into a friend and the friend says, "Hey, how you doing? I saw your video last week. You're talking to someone about cinema. It was awesome." And then you leave that friend, and that friend, right, is what Fichte would call the moment of anstos, this check that you now posit a new experience. And then after that friend leaves, right, you start rethinking, you start thinking through your thoughts as you're walking down the street, or etc. I'm not doing a good job of bringing Fichte more to light because I need to get into the nomenclature, the kind of Fichtean terminology, but I don't want to do that. I want to keep this relatively for people that are, interested in learning but not, well-versed philosophers. So I'm trying to keep it semi-simple, but at the same time, I'm not doing justice to Fichte. In 1794-95, Schelling is extremely Fichtean. If you read the early Schelling, he's extremely yep.
I think we lose the chain if I do not if I do not ask this question, and I lose it somewhere, right? So you said that this positing would then become absolute idealism at some point, which Kant would not like, right?
Well, not
I want to only. Mhm.
it would be able to grasp the absolute, but right, because Hegel it's like this. You see these two pens? This is the universal I that's always positing experience. This is another I that's part of you that's thinking a different thought. And then you have another experience. But when that experience happens, what posits, what brings these thoughts are, what brings in these ideas is it brings in both of these ideas. And now you have three I's. So this is what Fichte is trying to talk about, what he's trying to do. But at the same time, his philosophy, which is trying to bridge the gap between content and form and theoretical and practical philosophy, there is some form of absolute. There is some form of absolute knowledge. Well, not absolute knowledge. Let's not say that. There is some kind of unconditioned grasp of knowledge, which Kant wouldn't like. Kant actually didn't like any of this. He called it too metaphysical, and he thought it was reverting back to pre-critical philosophy. That means like Leibniz and Descartes and that. So yes. So maybe not absolute idealism. That's a term that Hegel uses to describe Schelling's and his philosophy in 1802. But yeah, sorry if I...
Right. So, yeah, I get that. I get what you're saying, and we talked about Kant's idea. We talked about Fichte's idea. What we are left with is Schelling's idea, and not to my wonder or surprise, I know you are deeply concerned with Schelling. So I would like to hear what he was doing then in the in this transition phase when we move from Fichte to Schelling. What is happening then?
Well, I mean, that's a huge question. Schelling is deeply involved with Fichte and Fichte's philosophy, but where he becomes extremely worried is when Fichte starts talking about what constitutes the not I, what constitutes not you, the non-thinking you. And at the time, Schelling is deeply engaged in the science of his day. He's reading what we would call the natural scientists, like Goethe and Schiller, Killmeyer, Herder, and he's becoming, romanticized with nature. Nature can't just be this dead mechanical object. We can't go back to this Newtonian mechanical world that Descartes saw, the clockmaker, you take apart the pieces and then you can understand the whole. He thinks this is just no. And so in 1796, he goes to visit his brother Karl in Leipzig, and he's teaching these two young kids. And as he's teaching these young kids, he starts hearing about Naturphilosophie from Killmeyer, who actually dubs the name Naturphilosophie. And he realizes that what Fichte's philosophy, what transcendental philosophy is missing is nature philosophy. So nature must have a ground, nature must be free, and nature must be alive. It has to have its own spirit. Now, every time I say this, the first question is, nature has a spirit? Yes. Spirit for Schelling is not the same spirit that is understood through the Hegelian project. It's not history. It's not the unfolding of consciousness. Spirit for Schelling are the intensities, the forces, the potencies that are beneath the material substance. I'll give you an example. Think of a tree. A tree takes the light from the sun, or even a plant, let's say, and it turns that light, that energy, into sugar, photosynthesis, right? All of this happens. We don't see it with our own eye. We don't see this process. We see them flourishing and growing, so we can assume that that's what's, but we know that they are flourishing as well. And so when Schelling brings up this entity of spirit, what he means is there's this potency, this power beneath the material that is really flourishing and teeming with life. And so he's completely at odds with Fichte, that the world can't just be this dead mechanical place. Nature can't be this dead mechanical entity that regenerates and degenerates, right? Winter comes and then everything dies and then it regenerates with spring and summer. He hates this idea. And at the time, he's hanging out with Goethe and Schiller and Caroline Schlegel and Dorothy Veit and Novalis and Schleiermacher, and he's becoming a romantic. He's listening to Beethoven. He's talking about art. He's talking about all these things. He's becoming an adolescent, but also he's thinking for himself. And he's thinking, I love Fichte's philosophy. He's right about transcendental philosophy, but there needs to be something more to nature. It can't just be, nature just can't be this dead entity that we continue to posit, right? That we posit through our own thinking. And so he becomes an objective idealist. So there's subjective idealism, which is Fichte's self-positing process, right? Positing, and that is held in check by the resistance of the world. Let's call it anstos, or the non-I, the not I. But objective idealism is really how do I explain this? Objective idealism is the fact that the world itself is connected to the mind. Mind and nature are not separate. They're not dual entities. They are made of the same qualities, and yet they're in different spatial locations. I always use my hands as an example. Your left and right hand, right? They're the same objects. They're made of flesh, bones, and blood, and yet they're inverted. They're mirror entities of each other, and they're in different spatial locations. So nature and mind are exactly the same. They're mirror entities of each other, but in different spatial locations. And so for Schelling's early philosophy, we need to, in a sense, fix the gap that Descartes and Fichte have done. Like the funny thing is that early Schelling calls Fichte the great repositor of Cartesianism. He thinks that Fichte has turned back into a Cartesian with this I and not I and this kind of subjective idealism. Even Hegel will make the same remark in the Differensschrift, which is this essay that he writes. So Schelling is saying, no, spirit or nature is visible spirit, right? Visible potency, visible power. Nature is visible spirit. Spirit is invisible nature. It's that potency, that power beneath nature that's pulsating and vivid and teeming with life. Very, very romantic. But at the same time, he's trying to say, look, true freedom is building the bridge between nature and mind, connecting them. And this is the early Schelling, the Naturphilosophie Schelling. Fichte hates this. This is what, in a sense, drives them apart. He thinks this is ridiculous. What are you doing? Nature? What? Nature has spirit? What? Nature's free? What does that even mean? What is that? What are you talking about? And of course, right, like Schelling is younger and still sees Fichte as a role model, but Fichte is dismissed in 1798 from Jena because his philosophy doesn't, well, it talks about God and religion in a practical sense. And so it's very vague about what God is. Is God a real entity that created the world, or is he just a moral order? And this leads to an atheism controversy that gets Fichte dismissed from Jena. And so after Fichte leaves, Schelling takes the chair of Jena. So we have Reinhold, who was the first chair, then Fichte, and now Schelling. So look at that great lineage in Jena. Unbelievable, right? Like, and I just want to say one thing before I continue with Schelling. For those viewers, Reinhold is also a fantastic philosopher. It just so happens that he's not very well known. He has his own elementary philosophy that's brilliant, that he takes onward from Kant and extends Kant's project, and then Fichte gets involved with this discussion. Anyways, Reinhold goes back to Austria and then Switzerland, and he goes there and teaches for a bit and then retires. But yeah, he's a very forgotten individual in philosophy, but he should be brought back up. But yeah, so Fichte leaves. Schelling is now being attacked by everybody. Are you a Fichtean? What are you? Are you a romantic? Are you an Aufklärer? Are you an enlightened thinker? Like, what are you? And at this time, you get this anti-enlightenment sentiment, right? They're, reason's great, but this rationalization of the world has led to this kind of mechanization of nature. And Schelling is all about, no, that's not what reality is. Reality is more. It's not mechanical. It's not processes. Even Kant, right? The world is not conforming to our understanding. That's not the case. No, mind and nature are intimately connected, and they have this great relationship. Yeah.
This gives me a lot to think about, because I'm still very much confused about a few things, but I think it will get clear once I read about them, right?
Well,
Oh,
I
wow.
have to be honest with you. I didn't do a very good job of Fichte because Fichte brings in this whole law of identity argument with A equals A, and then he shows you through this equation, this proposition, what is the self-positing moment. So I was very abstract about the self-positing point. So
No, but I still got an idea what he's talking about, and for the very first time, because I haven't read Fichte, I haven't read Schelling, so it at least makes sense to me that these are the things they are concerned with, and then they are talking about. And for anybody who will be watching, I'm sure. I know we are short on time because we decided the time limit already, but I just have two more questions to go with, right?
sure.
My first question is, this concerns your YouTube, right? And the question is, you're making a rigorous and thoughtful effort to bring German idealism and especially Schelling's philosophy to the fore, right? My question is, on a sincere note, why are you so concerned?
That's a good question. Well, um, there's this great line from Alain Badiou, the French philosopher, that philosophy is everywhere and nowhere. And that's what's going on right now. Philosophy is kind of disappearing, and a lot of universities are closing. Um, and now everyone's got a YouTube channel. This is not an attack at anybody, you or anybody else. The problem is that it's great that we have this access to ideas, but the thing is we don't have ongoing dialogue, we don't have ongoing encounters. And so when I was thinking about doing a YouTube channel, it was during COVID. And I'm probably a lot older than you, but when I was doing my undergraduate, there was this 70s and 80s TV show that I wasn't born at that time, by a guy named Brian McGee. And Brian McGee he was a politician and a philosopher, professional philosopher. He wrote a
And
book on.
I'm sorry to cut you short, but is this the same show where you used to get philosophers and then you used to talk to them, right? It is
Yes,
on YouTube now, right? And it
yes,
has all modern contemporary philosophers from Chomsky to Martha Nussbaum, John Searle, right? The famous ones, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
is it the same show? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So this was my first real encounter with philosophers actually engaging one another, and I loved it. They gave you a biography about about the philosopher and the thinker, and they engaged in this whole great, discussion. And I thought to myself, this is what YouTube needs. YouTube needs that spirit again. And really stripped down. Now, we're in a different age, right? I'm not sitting on a comfy couch with you talking to you in your house, or in a coffee shop where we're in different continents talking. So I wanted that same environment that McGee made. And I wanted it where, it's really hard as a student, even yourself, master's student or PhD student, to engage with all of these brilliant academics and talking to them and asking them questions. And I thought to myself, what happens if I got a series going where instead of just talking about freedom versus determinism, what happens if I did an episode on a thinker, tell their life story, what's their concept, what's their basic ideas? This way, if the viewer becomes interested, maybe they'll pick up a book by them and read them. And that was my thing. And the funny thing is that you're right. I'm a Schellingian at heart. So when Schelling was teaching in the 1840s, these young Hegelians showed up in his classroom and were causing some trouble. So I thought to myself, what would happen if, instead of being so devoted to just one thinker, what happens if we became all young idealists, where we became just obsessed with the ideas and the concepts? Now, I fell in love with German idealism in my undergraduate, but my master's, I became seduced by the dark side and was a huge, big fan of Gilles Deleuze and Derrida and Foucault and all of these postmodern thinkers. Not that I'm attacking the postmodern tradition, but I found that there was a kind of excising of the subject in postmodernity. Like there's no subject, right? There's no truth. I mean, these are just cliches, but I felt, in a sense, almost like those central issues that I was studying in my undergraduate were no longer, no longer relevant. Power, struggle, all of these ideas, and these are important ideas as well too, that the postmodernists are talking about. But I was more concerned with how do we understand the world? How do we understand ourselves? How do we think about the world, right? And so I became completely re-obsessed with German idealism again, because I think there is a lineage from Kant, let's say, to Schelling and even Hegel and Schopenhauer too. That's important. That needs to be, most people don't know this, but Schelling and Schopenhauer and the Schlegel brothers were so obsessed with knowledge around the world. The Schlegel brothers were the first to translate the Bhagavad Gita into German. And this is why if you read Schelling's philosophy of mythology, he's obsessed with India, he's obsessed with China, he's obsessed with Persia. He loves these mythological ideas. Same with Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer was devouring texts on Hinduism and Buddhism, and he was really interested in the East. But they were interesting thinkers thinking about the world, and we don't really have philosophers that think like that anymore. We don't have philosophers that try to systematize with science and art and all of these and bring them all together. So I think there are central issues in German idealism that are important. So important ideas about ethics, important ideas about art, important ideas about the human being and our relationship with the other. I also think the early Marx is important too, like alienation, and many of those ideas are important too. I think getting these out to people are really important. And my channel's not like super popular or anything, but it's and I'm not trying, and I don't make any money out of it, and I don't want to. I want it out there for people to become inspired by this quote by Novalis to romanticize the world with ideas. So that's essentially what it is, just to bring out these thinkers to everybody and have them think through. I really hated school, that? I couldn't stand, I was a terrible student in high school. Terrible student. Like really bad, like barely passed. I hated it. I didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up going to this trade school, and a retired Kant scholar, believe it or not, was doing a lecture on what is enlightenment. And he came into the room, walked in, and the first thing he says was Sapere aude, like dare to know. And I went, what the heck does that mean? I was so annoyed at this quote. Like, who are you, man? Like, I was like 20 years old, 19 years old. And then here's some guy saying, dare to know, have the courage to use your own reason. I was like, what? What are you talking about? I waited till after the lecture, and I talked to him, and he's like, oh, if you want, you can come to my office and we'll read What is Enlightenment. And then I read Kant for the first time there, and boom, I changed overnight. I became studious, and I wanted to read more and open up everything, and just, it was like overnight. So that same spark, I think everyone has that same spark, not for, just the German idealists, but for philosophy in general. I think we live in a time where we live in a crisis right now, a crisis with nature, a crisis with war. So this is the time to read these ideas. Now, that doesn't mean I think that we should read 19th century thinkers and think through their problems. No, I think we should read these thinkers and use some of their concepts to think through our own problems. So I don't think that Schelling's nature philosophy and its understanding of nature from the 19th century can help us, but it can help us reinterpret our understanding of nature. I think Hegel's understanding of history, there are certain issues with it, but I think there's stuff in Hegel that we can rethink and use right now. Same thing with Fichte, same thing with Kant. Yeah.
Very similarly, I was a terrible student at school as well, and I think I became studious the moment I discovered Hegel through a Marxist thinker, and that was Kojève. And people do not really suggest Kojève to me right now while understanding Hegel, but that was my starting point. And the first thing I read was Hegel's idea of master-slave dialectics, and that is how I came across philosophy. And I think things have changed since then, because I do not know about being smart or intelligent, but I really want to understand things. And I think that really helps as a starting point of anything.
No,
So, uh, yeah, please.
Kojev is brilliant. It's not that Kojev is. It's funny. Kojev was a brilliant student. The true Hegelian in France was Hippolyte. He went to Germany, spoke German, and read Hegel. But what Kojev gives you is a very interesting Hegel. He gives you the French Hegel. Still, it's brilliant. So
Yes.
don't stop. Just continue to read. Eve, people think that I'm going to try to turn them into Schellingians. That's not the case. No, if you're interested in Hegel and Marx, continue to read them. I can tell you, I can give you some sources that you should check out or whatever. But that's brilliant. That's awesome. I'm glad that you're
Perfect.
doing.
So let's conclude this conversation on that note, right? By you giving us some sources, and to the viewers who would be listening, potential sources where they could start reading about German idealism, one, about the historicity of it, the movement itself, then
Mhm.
understanding Kant, which you already mentioned in the video, right? And then Fichte and Schelling, and also Hegel if you would like. So please go on. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't ask me about Hegel. That's funny. My knowledge of Hegel. No, it's funny. No, it's funny because my knowledge of Hegel is very limited. Like I've not limited. I know the phenomenology of spirit very well. I was a Hegelian at one point, and I know his difference essay quite well. But the science of logic, I am not very well versed in, and I've only read bits and pieces through the encyclopedia. So I do think that Hegel was inspired by Schelling's system of transcendental idealism. I think the dialectic came from Schelling's Stufenfolge, his step series. I agree with Werner Marx on that. And there's a lot of interest in Hegel, and I'm really happy because that means that people will read more thinkers like, maybe they'll read Reinhold, maybe they'll read Kant, maybe they'll read Schelling. The best piece to read there are several pieces to read on German idealism, several. But the standard one is by Friedrich Beiser, and it's called German Idealism, The Struggle for Subjectivity. This is a fantastic text. It takes you through all of Fichte, all of Schelling, and Hegel, and I really recommend it. And Beiser his name is spelled Beiser. He has great books. He has another great book called The Fate of Reason. I highly suggest this book. This book goes through the thinkers that I didn't bring up, like Salomon Maimon, who's a brilliant scholar and a Jewish thinker that was homeless and writing critiques of Kant and inspiring Kant, believe it or not. Gottlob Schulze. I said Reinhold already. So I mean, it takes you through the text, The Fate of Reason, takes you from Kant to Reinhold to Schulze to Maimon to all of these great thinkers. There's a book by Dieter Heinrich, so Dieter Hein Heinrich, Rich, called Between Kant and Hegel. That is the best book for my Hegelian fans out there that are interested in Hegel, that want to see the specific movement in Hegelian terms. He's a very good scholar. I think that's really, really great. If you're interested in Fichte, I would start off with what I was talking about today. I wished I had done it a little less abstractly. His Science of Knowledge has been translated into English. I don't know if it's been translated in what's your mother tongue? Is it Hindi? Is it Gujarati? Is it
Yes, it's Hindi. It's Hindi.
It's Hindi? Yeah, I don't know if it's been translated in Hindi, which is a shame. So you're either forced with learning English and reading it in English, which I'm pretty sure a lot of Indians in Delhi speak
I think
English.
Yeah, Indians in the northern belt and also in the southern belt, they're very proficient with the English language because it has been imposed on us to
True.
have a way through it. Yes.
Yeah, there's that colonial history. Yeah, there you go. Um, I think Stephen Holgate is amazing. I think he's a fantastic Hegel scholar.
Is this the book you are talking about?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay. Right.
there's another book by if you want the PDF of this book, let me know and I'll email it to you. It's
Sure.
by a Canadian scholar who was the Hegel scholar at the time before Holgate. His name is H.S. Harris. It's called Phenomenology and System. That is my favorite book on the
Hmm.
phenomenology of spirit. It's very good.
He's the same scholar who wrote the Hegel's Ladder, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
that's him.
Yes.
That's him.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, now, so that's now, I have tons of Hegel friends, and they, when you discuss Hegel with them, um, they have their different scholars that who they appreciate when it comes to Hegel scholarship. I like Holgate because Holgate was the first Hegelian scholar I read. Next to Charles Taylor, I read Taylor's book, but Taylor isn't. Taylor's more of a like a right Hegelian. He's more of a like a kind of liberal reader of Hegel. Um, Pinkard is good. Terry Pinkard's good. Who else? I'm not a big fan of Pippin because of his comments about about Schelling, but Pippin is also good. Um, I don't know. What do you think about Zizek? Do you like Zizek's Hegel?
Um, I haven't really read Zizek on Hegel, but I've heard him talking about Hegel, right? And as controversial as it might sound, I don't really give him that. I don't really give him that credit of being a philosopher. For me, Zizek is a social commentator, and I keep him to that regard. So I don't let him get to my head uh, very easily. So
Yeah, I think his book on Schelling is terrible too. So don't
right.
worry, we're good.
He has a
We're
he has a book on Schelling. I was not aware.
he has a book on Schelling and psychoanalysis, and I'm not a big fan. I don't think he does. I don't think he does a good job. Um, I think Heidegger does a bit, and I don't really like Heidegger that much, but I think Heidegger does a better job of discussing Hegel and Schelling than Zizek does. So yeah, for Schelling, Andrew Bowie. It's called Schelling and Modern European Philosophy: An Introduction. Andrew Bowie is a wonderful scholar. He is the scholar that popularized Schelling in the 90s, that brought him back. There were Hegel studies in the 70s and 80s, but there was nothing on Schelling. Schelling was a couple essays had been translated, but not a lot. And, he was seen as a stepping stone, just like Fichte, to Hegel. And now there's a lot more work, but this goes through all of Schelling's philosophy. This is why this is a key book. This is a great book. It goes through all of his work, and he does it in such a great way that it's accessible for the non-philosopher. So I highly recommend it for Schelling. And for those of you that are interested in Schopenhauer, because I love Schopenhauer, I just think he's got problematic politics and problematic views on women and other people. Brian McGee's book on Schopenhauer is amazing. Like, it's just wow. It's very good. And a friend of mine, David Bather Woods, has a new book on Schopenhauer coming out, which I'm looking forward to reading as well too. But yeah, that's I would highly recommend those books to start. There's also a scholar named Dennis Scholting, who is a wonderful scholar. He does a lot of work on Kant. He's a Kantian, but he's writing a book now on the early Hegel and his influence of Kant. Anything by him, Dennis Chulting. He's a wonderful, wonderful scholar as well too. I'm giving English resources because there are German resources, but I'm not sure how much of your viewers speak German. Um, if you want any German resources, just reach out to me and I'll send you
Right.
whatever. Yeah,
Perfect. I think this would be it then. Did you have a good time talking and conversing with me?
of course. I think you're doing a wonderful job. By the way, I checked
Right.
out your I checked out your channel last night. I think you're doing great. Like your channel looks great. You're doing really good. You're doing really good work, and that's why I came out here. Like so, I'm happy to talk to anybody. Right. So I think what you're doing is great. I'll share the video. I'll also share your work. If you have a video you want me to retweet out, I'll do that. No problem. And
Perfect.
I hope you continue to study. I hope you continue to keep working on these central issues in German idealism. Not just you don't have to work on Schelling. You can work, definitely work on Hegel, and I wish you all the best.
Yes, thank you for that. And I also appreciate what you are doing with your YouTube channel because it really helps somebody like me to understand what these philosophers were about and their lives as well. So I'm not just seeing their ideas in alienation altogether, but I also get the context of where is it coming from. And your personal anecdotes, they do help me connect the dots here and there. Oh, this is why these things were happening. So now that we are in touch, right, when I read enough of Schelling and I have an idea that, oh, this is what Schelling is talking about, I would love to have you again to talk about Schelling this time and not about German idealism, right? So I
Perfect.
would love to do a video on life and philosophy of Schelling like you have posted out on your channel. And I would be
Sure.
very much interested in it.
I'd be
Right.
honored to.
So
Yep.
yes. So thank you so much, Chris, for doing this. Right. I still have a problem with calling you by your first name but you insisted, so I have to. I have no other option, right? So thank you for being here. Thank you for talking to me. For somebody who's sitting so away from where you are and agreeing to this conversation, I am actually grateful for doing this and how easily accessible you are. Yes.
Don't don't say that. There's no difference between us. There's different. I'm a little bit older than you, so I have a couple years on you, but you'll get there too. Just keep studying, keep working hard, keep reading, keep being inquisitive, and keep asking questions. You're doing wonderful. You're doing great.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're
Right.
welcome.
I will just end the recording. Just a minute. Yes.
Okay, sure.